An interest rate hedging product is a product sold by a bank to its customer in conjunction with the customer either already having an existing loan or about to take out a loan with that bank. It's commonly known as interest rate swap or an interest rate hedge. The purpose of the interest rate swap is to protect that customer from rises in interest rates in relation to its loan or mortgage which it has with the bank. Well, swaps comes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and they're all very complicated. A basic plain vanilla swap works as follows. You have a customer with a loan to its bank, and say for £1 million, and the customer agrees to pay the bank interest based on Libor, plus a margin. Now the margin's the bank's profit and is irrelevant for the swap discussion. So you have on this hand, you have a loan of £1 million with an interest rate on Libor, which fluctuates. The bank sells you a swap trying to protect the fluctuation of the interest rate on the basis that the customer agrees to pay the bank a fixed rate on a notional value of £1 million, so it relates to the loan, of say 5%, and at the same time the bank pays the customer back Libor. So as a real life example, got £1 million loan, 5% is what the client wants to pay on the swap, and Libor's 5%, make it easy. So the customer pays 5% for its Libor to the bank. Customer also pays 5% under the swap, but the bank pays the customer back Libor, which is 5%. So the two payments on the swap neutralise each other, and the customer ends up paying just 5%. So what happens if interest rates rise? If interest rates go up, say Libor goes up to 6%, the customer pays an additional 1% on its loan, but on the swap side, it still pays 5%, and the bank pays 6% back, so the bank is paying a net 1% back to the customer, which essentially counters the 1% the customer's already paid in addition on the Libor side on the loan. If they go down, and Libor has been down at rock bottom recently, as we all know, then what happens is, say Libor goes to 2%. So on your loan, the customer benefits because the customer's only paying 2% on the loan, plus its margin, but forget about the margin. On the swap, the customer's still paying 5%, and the bank's only paying back at 2%, which is the Libor rate. So the customer's paying a net 3% to the bank on the swap. So overall, the customer's paying 2% and 3%, so it gets back to its 5% it wanted to pay, but without the swap, the customer would only be paying 2% on its loan. Last year, the FSA started to review these swaps because there were concerns about the fact they'd been missold. Last June, the FSA published a review. It had been in consultation with the big four banks, being Barclays, HSBC, Lloyds TSB and RBS, which incorporates NatWest, because it had serious concerns about how these swaps had been missold to what they called their non-sophisticated customers. So following that review, the banks have agreed to review most of their products they've sold their non-sophisticated customers from the 1st of December 2001 to date. In January this year, the FSA published its pilot findings. It had looked at 173 cases across the four banks and determined that 90% of those cases, the customers had been missold. Now, why was that? Well, they looked at 5 issues predominantly, all of which were breaches of what it called its regulations. The first one was that the hedges or the swaps had been over-hedged, i.e. the notional value I talked about earlier was bigger, greater than the loan, or the swap lasted longer than the loan. Secondly, they looked at whether the bank had gone over from being a non-advisory role, an execution-only role, to giving advice to the client. Thirdly, they looked at whether the the bank had understood the client's needs, what the client's risk position was in terms of its exposure to risk about these products. It also looked at the incentives and the rewards which the bank were offering its employees for the customers to enter into these products. And lastly, it looked at what's known as the exit costs or the break charges, which had been applied to these products and which the customers really didn't know what they were and how they operated. So if you've had one of these products since 2001 and you think you've been missold, you should already actually have been contacted by your bank, because they should be writing to all their customers who've had any of these products. But if they haven't written to you, contact your bank, explain you've had a product, explain that you think you've been missold, and ask them to review it. Now, if they don't review it, or that comes back saying that there's no redress, then your other option is to go to the Financial Services Ombudsman to ask him to review it for you. And lastly, you have always got the option of speaking to a solicitor, which I would highly recommend in these circumstances. You can take the bank to court, however you've got to be wary, because in this country we have something called the statute of limitations, which dictates how long you have to sue a bank, in this case in relation to a hedge. Now that's normally 6 years, and it's 6 years from the date you took out the hedge. So if you took out your hedge 6 years ago, then you may have a difficulty with limitation. So what you need to do, you need to go to see a solicitor, because there are a couple of things you can do. First you can do is enter into a standstill agreement with the bank, whereby you agree that the limitation stops running, and then you have a chance to go through the review or to try and negotiate with the bank. Secondly, you can issue protective proceedings and not serve them on the bank, agree with the bank that you'll stay those proceedings pending the review. But the crucial thing to know is that once your limitation has expired, then that gives the bank a defence to any proceedings you issue, and you're likely to not be able to bring the claim. In relation to the FSA review, the pilot findings it published in January this year explained that the banks were looking at 3 forms of redress for customers. The first form is where the bank considers that had it complied with its regulatory obligations, the customer would not have touched this product, would not have taken any product out. In those circumstances, the bank is likely to offer full recompense to the customer, pay all its costs, including any exit fees. If, however, the bank considers that had it complied with its regulatory obligations, the customer would have taken out a product, but maybe not the product it did take out, a less onerous product, then the bank is likely to offer that less onerous product in place of the original product. Lastly, if the bank considers had it complied with its regulatory obligations, the customer would have taken out the product it took out in any event, then the bank's simply going to say, no redress, you haven't suffered the loss, you would have taken it out anyway. Now, in terms of courts, the courts aren't bound by what the banks offer you. So if you want to go to court, you can go to court. However, you need to be warned. There's only been 2 decisions so far. One in Scotland last year called Grant Estates v RBS. One in December last year called Green and Rowley v RBS. And both those decisions, the courts found firmly in favour of the banks.